Rolling blackouts are starting to impact basic services across the country. Arguably, they've been doing so for quite some time, and many are calling for certain sectors like agriculture, health and education to be excluded from load shedding. Now, the judiciary is also seeking exemption, with Chief Justice Raymond Zondo believing courts have been unable to reduce criminal case backlogs due to power cuts. However, in an affidavit made by former Eskom CEO Andre Derail before his departure, he said customers seeking protection from load shedding needed to be assessed on a case-by-case basis without compromising the integrity of the overall grid. He also flagged the serious and unacceptable risk of a national blackout if multiple institutions were assured an uninterrupted supply of electricity. Let's hone in on the judiciary's request. We're joined by Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So, yes, it is possible, and it is a fact that everybody has been impacted. The judiciary is no different. But squarely laying this at the door of load shedding in terms of the backlog in criminal cases in South Africa, is this an honest reflection?
Good afternoon, Tutu, and to the viewers at home. Well, I think the picture is a little bit more complicated than just putting it down to load shedding. And I think both the report and the Chief Justice last week did concede that there are systemic problems because the criminal case backlog has been there for some years, but load shedding has just made it worse. Because, for example, in criminal cases, you need a constant supply of electricity, number one, because you need to operate the courtroom facility, but also the court recording machines that are used in all criminal cases. They need a constant supply because they need to record all that is happening in the case. Because if there's one problem with the recording, then that might cause the whole case to be set aside and we might possibly let criminals walk free. So it is a complex problem.
Sure. Maybe let's talk about what happens at the lower courts. I think it was Justice Cameron. So they're looking at a feasibility study of helping people out with bail, right? Like basic amounts, people who cannot necessarily afford them. And he also mentioned that you've got about 150,000 prisoners in South Africa. 50,000 of those are awaiting trial. And this has been a problem that has been going on. And so even with all these electricity issues that we're having, why is that, at least, where you still got so many awaiting trial prisoners in South Africa, suggesting what?
Well, yes. So that problem of prison overcrowding requires multiple stakeholders to be involved. And Judge Cameron is quite right that, in fact, it should be possible that in those cases where the only reason that someone is behind bars is simply because they can't pay a small amount of bail for them to be, let's say it's a small or petty crime, then that person should be let free. And so that could be a way also to help in this load shedding problem, because in fact some of the reasons why certain cases can't proceed is because some of these cases that involve petty offences keep having to come back to court to deal with a minor issue of a payment of a small amount of bail. So Judge Cameron is quite correct. But again, the issue of load shedding affects the courts in another way, because some of the courts do have generators, fortunately, but those generators only provide light. Obviously, light is important, but like I said, there's other functions within a court case that are impacted by electricity that need that constant supply.
Sure. You mentioned the report last week and the presentation that the Chief Justice had. What's happening with land claims?
Well, in land claims, that court, unfortunately, is sort of caught between two crises. The first one was COVID, where the court could not really function because the land claims court is a unique court in the sense that it's one of those courts that go to the people. It deals with people in rural areas. Many of them are in really poor villages, so it tries to reach them where they are. So with the lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic, the courts could not travel to the people, nor could the people travel to the court. That means all the cases that the courts could deal with could not be dealt with. So after there was an easing of the lockdown and people could move around, then came load shedding, and that court only had a generator in November of 2022, which is really startling to hear. But that is the reality that the court faced, and which is why we see so much of a backlog in its cases, and the finalization rate is so low.
Can we reimagine how things can work, and so we can speak to all of these issues or speak to solutions to some of the issues that we've highlighted, right? Are there any suggestions that maybe you can bring about? Because as we mentioned, Andre Derrida says, well, to exempt, certain institutions, including hospitals, I believe would also have an impact on the grid. And so how do we make it better?
So there are a number of solutions that, in fact, the judiciary and judges in particular have suggested. One of them is to move the courts to be online. You'll remember a couple of weeks ago, the Johannesburg High Court, the generator broke down and they moved the cases online. So one of the ways in which you can try to avoid load shedding is to have certain cases that don't necessarily need people to testify in court, or they need to be argued in court. Those ones could be dealt with online. They could be, the judges could very well be sitting at home or in a remote location. The practitioners as well could be sitting in a remote location. The judiciary has been saying that they want to implement this, but there hasn't been enough money that's been allocated. Last week we heard from the budget, about 178 million has been allocated to this project, so there is at least an idea that seems to be getting off the ground. The other one is sort of to use more mediation, which requires less presence at courts. It can be done at different offices where the courts, before they even get to a judge, they're mediated so that the two parties can sort of find each other without necessarily involving a judge to resolve that particular dispute. So those are just two of the suggestions.
When it comes to access, especially from the everyday person in South Africa, what is your assessment? Well,
I would say, by and large, our courts are accessible. In terms of just people being able to bring their claims, but the big problem with access to the courts and access to justice has been money. It costs quite a lot to file a case in court, and for many people, including people like myself, I work, but I wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer. And so that is the kind of key barrier to access. And there have been ways of trying to work around it. We know that most recently there was this office of the Solicitor General, which was working with the state attorneys, trying to reduce costs. Legal aid services have been expanded to deal with land issues, for example, so that people with land-related cases, but I think the cost of legal services and access in court is something that we should be debating quite openly and finding solutions to them.
Absolutely. Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter, thank you very much for your time.